My name is Nicole. I'm 30 years old, living and working in Seattle, a city where the rain never seems to stop, but somehow the people can feel even colder. Whenever someone asks me about my family, I just smile faintly. Not because I don't have parents or siblings, but because I've never truly been considered part of that household. My mother, Linda, is the kind of woman who always shows up with flawless hair, a voice like melted honey, and a love she openly reserves for her eldest child, Ethan. Every time I saw the two of them laughing together, hands clasped like best friends, I felt like an outsider. I'm the youngest, born 6 years after Ethan, and ever since I can remember, my place in the family has been clear. Secondary, disposable. My father, Jonathan, was the only one who ever truly cared for me, but he was always too silent when it came to Mom's blatant favoritism. He never defended me, never stopped her whenever she dismissed or criticized me. Over time, I learned to stay quiet, not because it didn't hurt, but because I knew speaking up wouldn't change anything. In 7th grade, I won 2nd place in a county science competition, the only student from my school to earn a prize that year. Mom barely glanced at the ribbon before asking, "So, how did Ethan do on his SATs?" But when Ethan won a school-level debate contest, she threw a full party, invited neighbors, relatives, even his teacher. I still remember being told to make lemonade for the guests while Ethan stood in the center of the room, holding flowers and soaking in praise like some statewide inspiration. I tried. God knows how hard I tried. I joined the basketball team, led my finance class, got into the University of Michigan on an almost full scholarship. When I told Mom, she sighed and said, "Ethan got into Yale, but Michigan is okay." That word, okay, cut like a knife. Again. Ethan, of course, never had to worry about a thing. While I juggled school and 2 part-time jobs just to cover my expenses, he got a brand new car, and monthly spending money landed in his account like clockwork. When he wrecked the car after a late-night party, Mom hired a lawyer to handle it smoothly. When I asked why no one had ever helped me like that, she simply said, "You're strong. You don't need help." Don't need it? I wondered if I'd grown strong for myself, or because no one ever gave me permission to be weak. I was excluded from everything in the most subtle, quiet ways. No big announcements, no dramatic scenes, just silence each time I tried to speak. They threw a 35th anniversary party for my parents and didn't invite me, even though I lived only an hour away. When I called to ask why, Mom replied casually, "Oh, I thought you were busy. Ethan said so." A clipped excuse. No guilt, no surprise. For years, I tried convincing myself I was just overly sensitive, that maybe I was imagining things. But a 6-year-old doesn't imagine her mother throwing a birthday party for her brother while leaving her with a plastic container on the kitchen counter, holding a tiny cake with the words, "Happy Birthday, N," scrawled in white frosting. I stared at that N for hours. Not Nicole, not daughter, just N. A leftover letter, a stranger. Everything began to change in the spring 2 years ago, when my father, Jonathan, was suddenly hospitalized due to a mild heart attack. The doctor said if we had waited just a few more minutes, the consequences could have been much more severe. I remember standing silently in the hospital hallway, pale yellow lights casting long shadows on the wall, my heart frozen by one quiet realization. I was still terrified of losing the only person in my family who had ever truly cared for me. Dad was discharged after 3 days. He looked thinner, but his smile hadn't changed. While Mom busied herself texting her lawyer about a new investment, I was the one peeling fruit, fluffing pillows, and organizing his medication. Ethan came by only once, took a few photos for Instagram, and left. I didn't blame him. His apathy had been nurtured like a family heirloom. That was when I discovered an old yellowed letter in the drawer next to Dad's hospital bed. It was from my grandfather, written in 1978, describing the family's roots. A small town in central Italy called Vinci. It was where he'd spent his childhood before emigrating to the US after the war. I had never heard my father mention this place before, but when I asked, his eyes lit up like a boy's. He said he'd always dreamed of going back, just once, to feel the cobbled streets beneath his feet, to breathe in the scent of warm bread baking in the old brick oven near the church. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in front of my laptop, zooming in on satellite maps, reading travel blogs, digging through immigration archives at the Seattle Public Library, desperate to make sure Vinci was real and still alive. The next morning, I opened a new savings account. Every month, I transferred $2,000 from my fixed salary, an enormous chunk given the cost of living in Seattle. I cut everything. No more takeout coffee, canceled my gym membership, swapped Uber for the bus. My coworkers thought I was saving up to buy a home. I said nothing, because my goal wasn't bricks or walls. I was buying something my father had never dared to dream of. Almost 2 years later, the account reached $58,200. I could hardly believe it. When I called the Vinci Town Hall and was connected with a woman named Signora Bianca, manager of the local records office, her voice trembled when she read my grandfather's name from an old birth certificate. Giuseppe Moretti, born in 1923. She told me a distant relative still lived in town, running a small wine shop that had been in the family for nearly 80 years. I spent 3 weeks planning every detail, a rental villa tucked in an olive grove near Vinci, round-trip business class flights for Dad, myself, and, at the time, I imagined, anyone who wanted to join. I booked a Tuscan cooking class, a private winery tour with our relatives, a small ceremony at the ancient church where my grandfather had been baptized. I even hired a local photographer to document the whole journey, like a personal documentary, just for Dad. My father would turn 63 this June. Not a milestone like 60 or 70, but to me, after that heart attack, every year he was still here felt worth celebrating. When I revealed the plan to him over lunch at his favorite Italian restaurant on a rainy afternoon, he went completely silent. I had never seen my father cry, but that day a single tear slowly fell, and he held my hand tightly. He said just 3 words, "Thank you, sweetheart." It was short, but in that moment, every sacrifice over the past 2 years felt completely, utterly worth it. I hadn't told Mom or Ethan at that point, partly because I wanted to be sure everything was confirmed, and partly because I didn't believe they would genuinely care. I revealed the Italy trip plan one evening in early March during a rare family dinner with both parents and Ethan present. We sat around a table at Dad's favorite steakhouse in downtown Tacoma. When I laid out the details, flights from Seattle to Florence, a vintage villa in the Chianti Hills, a reunion with our Italian relatives, and a handmade pasta workshop, Dad lit up like a child receiving a rare Lego set. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Wow, you really went all in, huh?" he said, swirling his wine with a strange tone. My mother, seated beside him, gave a soft nod. "Sounds interesting," she replied, eyes never lifting from her phone. I'd grown used to this kind of half-hearted reaction, but at least they didn't object, or so I thought. In the following weeks, I sent detailed emails with flight options and the prepaid hotel costs. No reply from Mom. Ethan left a thumbs up in the family chat, then went silent. I called, texted, asked for input from Ethan's diet needs to Mom's mattress preference, but only got cold politeness. Nothing direct, but enough to make me suspicious. One Thursday evening, I dropped by my parents' house to finalize trip details. The living room lights were bright. I heard laughter from the kitchen and guessed Dad had told one of his stories, but when I entered, the air shifted. Ethan sat with Mom, wine in hand, both of them falling quiet like someone had turned off the music. "Oh, Nicole, we didn't expect you," Mom said flatly, setting down her glass. "I thought you were busy planning your big adventure." I kept calm. "I need to confirm numbers for the Vinci Winery tour. They need final headcount this week." Mom glanced at Ethan. He shrugged slightly. "Actually, Mom and I were thinking of another option. A cozy party at home, so friends and family can join. Dad likes familiar things, you know." I froze. "You're saying you want to hold Dad's birthday here instead of in Italy?" Mom slowly nodded. "Tuscany sounds lovely, but do you really think he'd be comfortable? 12 hours of flying, jet lag, unfamiliar food. At his age, sometimes simple is better." I turned to Ethan. "You weren't going to tell me before making a whole new plan?" "You always do things your way," he smirked. "We're just offering a better fit. The whole family agrees. He'll enjoy it more with everyone around." Not everyone has the time or money for Italy, Nicole. I never forced anyone to go, I said, pulse rising. This trip is for Dad, not for me. And he said himself he wanted to go. Mom stood, adjusting her cardigan. We haven't said anything to your father yet, so let's not turn this into a fight. We all want what's best for him, right? That's when I knew they had made plans behind my back. Quietly, deliberately, and without me. The bitterest part wasn't the opposition. It was being treated like I didn't exist. After that day, I received no more messages in the family chat. All communication funneled through Mom and Ethan. When I called Dad to ask about the trip, he just chuckled and said, "Oh, your mom told me you're too busy with work to decide." I nearly dropped my phone. My father, the one I thought was always on my side, had no idea about the plan I spent 2 years preparing. At the time, I didn't yet know what else they had kept from him, but one thing was crystal clear. I had been quietly removed from my own father's birthday celebration. No warning, no invitation, no seat at the table. Saturday afternoon, I stopped by my parents' house after finishing an early consultation shift at the office. In my hand was a gift box. A custom-printed photo book of the Tuscan region, complete with captions I'd written myself, including images of the villa, the winery, the old church, and the stops my dad used to mention in those rare father-daughter talks. I planned to hand it to him personally, a small surprise during these increasingly suffocating days. I didn't call ahead, partly to preserve the surprise and partly because I believed you shouldn't need permission to visit your own parents. But from the start of the block, something felt off. Cars lined both sides of the curb, familiar names flashing through my mind. Aunt Hannah's car, Uncle Kent's, the Clarks' neighbor couple, and that silver SUV I was certain belonged to Ethan's best friends. My eye twitched slightly. I walked faster, gripping the gift box tighter. As I neared the living room window, laughter echoed from inside and made me stop cold. Inside was a room bursting with color, streamers, balloons, candles, and a large banner draped across 2 bookshelves. Happy 63rd birthday, Jonathan. My mom wore her olive green dress, the one she always said was for truly special occasions. Ethan was pouring wine for a group of familiar relatives. My aunt was laughing with a young woman I didn't recognize. And in the middle of it all, my dad. Still him, but positioned like a centerpiece on a stage I was never invited to step on. I rang the doorbell. It opened after about 7 seconds. It was my mom. She stood there, Prosecco still in hand, her eyes scanning me like I was a late delivery. "Nicole," she said, her voice unpleasantly calm. "I thought you were on a business trip in Portland." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I'm not in Portland. I came to wish Dad a happy birthday." She didn't avoid eye contact, but she didn't invite me in either. Tonight was something we all decided together. Just a small party, close friends, and immediate family. We agreed. Your presence wasn't necessary. I stood frozen, my throat burning. We? Who, exactly? "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said, lowering her voice. "Your father deserves a peaceful evening. No drama, no tension. You understand that, right?" I gave a dry laugh, not out of joy. "So you planned this behind my back? Not a single message? Not even a call?" "We talked about this," she replied. "That Italy trip was excessive. It stressed everyone out and no one wanted to follow your itinerary. I'm simply choosing what's more pleasant for everyone." "More pleasant," I repeated, "for everyone, except me." I looked over her shoulder into the crowded room. People were raising glasses. Someone burst into laughter at a joke Ethan had just told, too far for me to catch. Not a single person looked up as I stood there, at the doorway, like some nameless shadow. "Does Dad know I wasn't invited?" I asked. She didn't respond immediately. "He doesn't know," I answered for her, my voice hoarse. "He has no idea about the plan I've worked on for 2 years, about the villa, the place Grandpa lived, the family-owned winery, the Italian relatives I finally found. He doesn't know, because none of you ever let him know." My mother stared at me. The smile was completely gone. You're making a scene, Nicole. This isn't the time. I raised the box. This is the gift I brought for Dad. If you won't let me in, at least give it to him for me. No need, said a familiar voice from behind. It was Ethan. He stepped into view, glass in hand, looking at me like I'd just interrupted an awards ceremony. You should go. Don't ruin Dad's day. I looked him straight in the eyes. What about my day? 2 years of my life, money, time, effort, and I get erased from his birthday like a stranger? None of you think there's anything wrong with that? Ethan said nothing. Mom quietly closed the door. A soft click echoed, but to me it roared, like a metal lock snapping shut. I stood there another minute. Then I turned, still holding the gift box, my vision blurred, not from the wind. On the drive home, I didn't shed a single tear, not because it didn't hurt, because the pain had moved beyond the reach of tears. That evening, when I returned to my small apartment in Capitol Hill, it had already started to rain in Seattle. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't cry either. I just felt empty, as if someone had scraped all the emotions out of my chest, leaving only a numb, hollow space behind. I placed the gift box on the kitchen counter, carefully untied the ribbon, opened it, and looked through each photo book page I had spent a whole month laying out. Beneath the photo of a stone villa, soaked in afternoon sunlight, was the caption, "I hope you'll find something again, in the land, in the wind, in the heart of the one who once belonged to that place." I closed the book. Quietly, I opened my laptop, logged into the villa reservation, called La Vigna di Pietro, and clicked Cancel Reservation. The cancellation fee was 15%. I accepted it. A soft ding chimed as the confirmation came through. I didn't feel a thing. Next was Delta Airlines. I had booked business class tickets for both Dad and me, set to depart in mid-June, with a layover in Atlanta. I canceled both, received nearly $4,200 back after deductions. Then came the cooking class in Florence, the winery tour at Recce, our distant relatives in Italy, and the small ceremony at Santa Lucia Church where Grandpa had once been baptized. Step by step, I erased every trace. Finally, I logged into the savings account I'd set aside just for this trip. The remaining balance was $54,780. I transferred the entire amount to my personal account. It took less than 30 seconds. Inside me, there was no relief, no bitterness either, just a very distinct kind of exhaustion, like when you stay up all night caring for someone sick, only for them to turn away and shut the door on you. I picked up my phone, texted Mom a single sentence. "I've canceled the entire Italy plan. Consider it as if I never tried." Then I blocked her number. I blocked Ethan's too. Aunt Hannah, Uncle Kent, anyone who was at that party and didn't speak up for me. I deleted them all. No reason to keep them in my contacts anymore. The only person I didn't block was Dad, but he didn't call either. 3 days passed. I didn't eat dinner, just drank black coffee and paced between the living room and the balcony. Seattle kept raining. Wind rustled through the lavender pots I once cared for so meticulously. A wilted leaf fell onto the cement floor, making no sound. On the 4th night, I picked up my phone, called Dad. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. I left a message. "Dad, it's me, Nicole. I know you weren't the one who decided all that, but I still feel hurt, deeply hurt. I just want you to know I prepared everything for you, not for myself. I've canceled it. Everything. I don't know if you'll ever understand, but I can't keep pretending anymore." I hung up. The phone slipped onto the couch cushion. I sat still for a long time, as if not moving might somehow make time stop. The next morning, I decided to leave the city. Not far, just a small cabin on Whidbey Island I had once rented to write my graduate thesis. The place had no strong cell signal, only ocean waves, seagull cries, and a dark wooden bookshelf that always smelled like old paper. Texted my boss to request 3 days off, no explanation. Packed a few clothes, a leftover bottle of Italian red wine from Christmas, and a journal with blank pages. On the ferry ride to the island, I watched the pale sun shimmer on the gray water like wrinkled silk. A little boy stood beside his mother, pointing at each seagull, calling out the wrong names but laughing anyway. I wondered, had my mother ever looked at me like that? Had she ever truly seen me? Not as a lesser version of Ethan, but as myself. I had no answer, but I knew one thing. This time, I wouldn't come back the same. I wouldn't be the one putting out fires I didn't start. I wouldn't knock on doors already locked, marked with a not welcome sign. As I stepped onto the wooden walkway leading to the cabin, I heard a soft chime from my jacket pocket. A voicemail alert. It was from Dad. I listened. A long sigh, then his voice. Soft, slightly shaky. Nicole, I don't know what's going on, but I need to see you. There's something I think you don't know yet. I gripped the phone tightly in my hand. I replayed Dad's voicemail 3 times, each time feeling my insides twist tighter. There's something I think you don't know. That line echoed in my head as I slowly paced around the small wooden cabin tucked among pine trees. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind beating against the windows felt like a push, a reminder to go back and face what I had been avoiding since that front door slammed in my face. The next morning, I drove back to Seattle. On the way, I didn't call Dad. Instead, I called someone I never thought I'd reach out to. Ethan. I said just one sentence, I want the truth. He paused for a few seconds, then quietly replied, "Come over tonight. Rebecca will be out. We need to talk without anyone interrupting." I arrived at 6:30. Ethan's 2-story home sat in a quiet neighborhood. Stone path leading to the porch, warm yellow lights glowing from the living room. It looked far more harmless than the image of him I had carried for years. But the moment he opened the door, I saw something different in his eyes. He handed me a cup of tea, no wine, no pleasantries. We sat across from each other on the sofa, lights dimmed, only the soft glow from the kitchen corner lit the space. I heard Dad's voicemail, I began. "So did I," Ethan said, eyes cast down to the wooden floor. "And, yeah, there are things you need to know." I crossed my arms, forcing myself not to interrupt. "Mom told Dad you didn't want to come to the birthday," he said bluntly, "that you were too busy, too upset about the Italy trip getting pushed back, so you decided to take a break from the family. She told him you weren't answering texts, not picking up calls, and he believed her." I exhaled, hands cold. He had no idea about the 2 years I spent planning, about contacting our family in Italy. Nothing? Ethan shook his head. I trusted her. I saw you pulling away from the group chat, canceling meetings, and not showing up to the party. I thought maybe she was right, that you were angry, cutting ties. But these last few days, something didn't add up. I clenched the teacup handle. Why did you believe her, after everything? "Because I've always let her control the narrative," Ethan admitted. "I was the protected one. You were the one who had to stand on your own, because you didn't have Mom shielding you. But that also made me blind." I stared at him, searching for a specific feeling, but couldn't name it. Finally, I asked, "How do you know for sure she lied?" Ethan stood, walked into his study. He returned a few minutes later with a folder and a thick envelope. "Dad found a bunch of old letters and documents in Mom's private drawer," he said. "There were printed emails you sent to the whole family. She never forwarded them to Dad. There was a planner where she scheduled the party, and next to it, in red ink, 'Don't mention Nicole to Jonathan. Reason, tension, protect his health.'" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ethan handed me the envelope. "These are copies Dad asked me to give you. He knows now, and he's furious." "Where is he?" "At Uncle Rich's place, his college friend. He left the house after confronting Mom last night." My chest felt hollow, like everything that had collapsed was now being rebuilt, but with broken pieces that didn't quite fit. "I'm sorry," Ethan said softly. "I know sorry doesn't cut it, but I want to make things right." I stood up. "You can help by telling Dad I want to see him, today. Anytime he's ready." Ethan nodded. "I'll call him right now. And Nicole, Thank you for coming. I stepped out just as twilight was falling. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried the weight of cold. My heart held 1,000 unanswered questions, but one thing I knew for sure: my mother had orchestrated everything. My dad arranged to meet me on Sunday morning at Uncle Rich's cabin by Lake Sammamish, where he'd been staying. The sky was gray, mist hovering over the water, echoing the heaviness I'd been carrying for weeks. But when I arrived, Dad was standing on the porch wearing that old brown jacket I remembered from our first father-daughter camping trip when I was 12. He hadn't changed. Still the only person who ever truly saw me. I stepped out of the car, holding my composure. Dad walked up and gently pulled me into a hug. No words, no explanations. In that embrace, I realized I'd been waiting for this moment longer than I thought. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. I nodded, though I wasn't really sure. "And you?" "Never felt more heartbroken and clear-eyed at the same time," he sighed. "We need to talk, but first, Ethan's on his way. I want the three of us to sit down, no more guessing." I didn't resist. A while ago I might have, but now the truth had to be spoken. Clearly, with no evasion. When Ethan arrived, the air in the Pinewood living room grew heavy. Dad sat between us, his hands clasped together. He was the first to speak. "I listened to your voicemail, Nicole, and I've read everything Ethan brought. I'm sorry I shook my head, my voice catching. "You don't need to apologize. I just don't understand why Mom would do that." Ethan sat upright. "She doesn't hate you. But for a long time, she's been jealous of your bond with Dad. You're the one part of his life she couldn't control. I was the one who followed orders, so I got to stay close." Dad was quiet for a while before speaking softly. "Your mom once told me she felt excluded, that I gave you too much attention. I thought it was just a fleeting insecurity. I didn't realize it was a wound buried deep. I wasn't sure if I felt anger or sadness, I just felt hollow. Why didn't she tell me? Why destroy everything instead of just having a conversation?" "Because that's how she was taught to survive," Ethan answered. "Maintain control, shape the story, manipulate emotions. That's how she was raised, not to get hurt. And in doing so, she hurt all of us," I said, not blinking. "I can't forgive her, unless she's willing to face it." Dad nodded. "I called your mom. She agreed to meet us this afternoon, at the house, but only if all three of us are there." I sat quietly in the car for a long while as we returned to the familiar road leading to my childhood home. The white 3-story house came into view with its blue-painted fence I once climbed to skip ballet practice. It had never looked so unfamiliar. Mom was waiting in the living room. She didn't stand, didn't smile, just looked up as we entered. Her gaze met mine first, not defiant, not defensive, just something tired and Dad spoke first. "Linda, we're not here to blame. We need the truth." Mom was silent for a few seconds, then looked directly at me. "Nicole, I was jealous of you. I lied. I hid the emails. I made up the story that you turned your back on the family just so I could control that birthday." I stood still, heart pounding, not from shock, but because she finally said it. "I felt invisible to your father," she continued. "Since you were born, you two shared a language I was never part of, and I was wrong to turn that into a weapon." "What do you plan to do now?" I asked. The question held no anger, just clarity. "I'm starting therapy," she replied. "The doctor your dad recommended. I've made the appointments twice a week. I don't know what I can fix, but I want to start." None of us said anything else. We didn't need to. That afternoon, as I left, my mom stood by the door. She didn't beg, didn't justify. She simply said one thing. "If you're ever ready, I'd like to hear about the Italy trip, even if it never happened." I paused and looked at her. "It still can, but this time not for you, not for the family, for Dad, and for me." For the first time in my life, she didn't try to respond. She just nodded, small but real. The flight departed on an early July morning. My father and I sat together by the window on a direct flight from Seattle to Florence. When the flight attendant handed out warm towels and Dad rotated his left shoulder, the one he always called his college basketball souvenir, I looked over and realized he had aged. Not drastically, but enough for me to understand. If I didn't do this now, there wouldn't be another chance. Tuscany greeted us with golden sunshine and the scent of lavender thick in the air. The villa I had booked, Casa del Vento, sat on a hillside, blanketed in olive trees and vineyards, with stone-paved paths and a sun-bleached, arched wooden gate. The first time Dad saw it, he simply said, "Looks just like that photo from your grandpa's 1962 letter." It took us 3 days to adjust to the time zone and adapt to the local rhythm. Late lunches, standing espressos, and conversations held more with eyes than words. Every morning, Dad and I would sit on the veranda, sip coffee, read maps, and bicker lightly about whether we should start in Valdorcia or head straight to Vinci. On the 5th day, we reached Vinci, the little town where my great-grandfather was born. The San Giovanni Church still stood, surrounded by the ancient cypress trees he had once described in the purple-inked notebook I'd kept since childhood. Marta, the town's archive keeper, had our records ready. When Dad held the original birth certificate of his grandfather, I saw his hands tremble. It wasn't age, it was the weight of touching something that had always just been a family dinner tale. That evening, we were invited to dine with the Rechises, a distant branch of our family. We sat under grapevines in their backyard, at a long table draped in white linen, warm string lights glowing on faces that were both strange and strangely familiar. A man named Pietro, around my age, raised his glass of Montepulciano and said in broken English, "To your return, Jonathan. Blood comes back to the land." We rode back to the villa in silence. On the way, Dad finally said, "Thank you for not giving up, even when everyone wanted you to stop." I said nothing, I just held his hand. In that moment, every wall my mother had built over 3 decades, with blame, comparison, and silence, vanished. On our last day, we took a cooking class in Siena. I learned to make tagliatelle while Dad spilled the salt jar twice, too distracted by the blonde chef. "She looks just like someone from Cinema Paradiso," he grinned, like a kid. We laughed the whole time, not because of the mess, but because we finally felt alive, fully, in a space where no one interrupted, no one dictated what was appropriate or expected. When we returned to the US, I mailed a printed photo album to my mom. No captions, no explanations, just proof. The trip happened, even without her, and without needing her permission. Surprisingly, she called. For the first time in months, her voice wasn't laced with control. She said simply, "Thank you for sharing. I'm trying." I didn't respond right away, but a few weeks later I agreed to meet her at a cafe near the park. The meeting was brief, awkward, imperfect, but real. She spoke of therapy, of crying silently, of seeing her own childhood for the first time without blaming others. 1 year later, we celebrated Dad's birthday at a small Italian restaurant in Kirkland. Just 5 people, Dad, me, Mom, Ethan, and his wife, Rebecca. No banners, no noise, no obligatory relatives. Dad lifted his glass of Prosecco, looked around the table, and finally rested his eyes on me. Last year's trip was the greatest gift I've ever received, not just because I returned to my roots, but because I realized how strong my daughter truly is, standing for what's right even when the world pushes back. I smiled. Mom did too, not the old tight smile of Linda the controller, but that of a mother relearning how to simply be human. It wasn't the end. Nothing in this family ends neatly. But at least from that moment on, we began again, with truth, and with the freedom to be ourselves, no one's permission required. Nicole's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes, in order to protect what's right, you have to give up the illusion of peace within your family. Real love doesn't come with control or conditions. It's shown through respect and understanding. In real life, many people are isolated simply for standing by the truth. But just like Nicole, when you stay true to your values, you don't just save yourself. You open the door to healing if others are willing to change too. What do you think about Nicole's choice? Would you have the same courage if you were in her place? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt family stories and powerful life lessons.